and get started. And so the first slide that you see here is who's presenting today and who our panelists are. My name is Kina Avila, and I'm a professor in the education department here at Linfield University. So joining me today are Hope Walter. Hope's going to wave her hand vigorously so everybody sees Hope, and Tonda Liggett, another professor in the education department, waving her hand vigorously, and Stephanie Delati, who's one of our university supervisors. There she is. And then me. And we each interviewed someone different for our panel today. And they're community members, they're connected to Linfield. And we're going to look at different issues in regards to equity in PK-12 education regarding comprehensive distant learning and what now we know as the transition into hybrid for some folks. And they are all parents who are on our committee or on our panel, and some of them are connected in different ways. We acknowledge that there's a lot of debate and a lot of concern about the reopening of schools, going to hybrid, and what has happened in terms of school closures and comprehensive distant learning. We understand that this is a hot topic and pretty emotional for a lot of folks. And so we're not intending this space to be necessarily a debate about the reopening of schools or going back to brick and mortar. We'll talk about some of the transitions from our parent perspectives with our parent hats on, but we're not kind of going into the debate about whether schools should open or whether they should have opened sooner or anything like that. That's not what this space is intended to do. Our goal right here during the next hour or so is really just to provide this space for people to honestly share about their individual experiences as we're parenting during CDL, knowing that there's been lots of challenges and lots of successes during that time, and really kind of focusing on equity and how that is implemented in CDL or not implemented in CDL. And so we have questions that'll focus on mental health. We have questions that'll focus on equity for working parents, and some other questions. So without further ado, we'll kind of just dive right into it, and I will have Tonda introduce Amy Widmer.
Hello. Yes, I have the great pleasure of introducing Amy Widmer. She's the mother of two amazing children, Kason, who is 7 and in 1st grade, and then Addie, who's 4, and she does preschool at home. Amy was a teacher in McMinnville School District until her son was born in 2013. And in addition to full-time mothering, and being extraordinary, Amy is also a Linfield student teacher supervisor. So I will let Stephanie introduce Adam.
Hi all, I get the pleasure of introducing my husband. He is a 2006 Linfield graduate, married the high school sweetheart, father of 2 crazy children, Cohen, who is 7, 1st grader in the district, and then Ayla, who is 4, doing preschool at home. He spent his entire time so far at Sheridan School District, taught middle school for a bit, 2nd grade, and has most recently spent the last 5 years as an instructional coach.
All right, and Hope, will you introduce Amy Scholler?
Sure. Amy is actually a long-term friend of mine, and she also works at Linfield, as you can see from the slide. She has 2 students currently in the McMinnville School District. One is a 10th grader at Mac High, and the other one is a 7th grader. And both of Amy's students qualify under the category of talented and gifted students. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Great. And I'll introduce Donna Montoya. Donna is a 2004 graduate of Linfield, Go Cats, in economics and Spanish. She's the assistant director of career development, and she has a 2nd grade son, Damien, in the dual language program here in McMinnville School District. And so those are our panelists, and I'll stop sharing that screen so we can see each other a little bit more. And Tonda is going to go ahead and get us started off. Tonda, you're muted. We can't hear you. You got to start over now.
Love that.
I was waiting for the first one who was going to do that. And
I
yeah,
know,
you get a prize.
somebody's got to do it, right? I thought I
Right.
would. I'll do it for everybody. It's done. There. Let's see. I'm Tonda Liggett. I've been at Linfield for, I believe this is my 3rd year or so. I'm on this panel today. I have a partner who has twin 11-year-olds. They're in 6th grade right now. And they are very different learners. One is doing better in CDL learning. She's a little bit more introverted. And then the boy is suffering because of the social aspect of it. So this topic is dear to my heart because, as I try to support them in their own schooling and support them where they are, there are some gaps, it's something that encompasses our whole life. So, they're fortunate enough to have some tutors to support them. And my involvement happens to be sort of like the PE teacher. We do hikes outside of school. We do sledding and bike riding and outdoor activities to support just their physical growth, because they're at that age right now where they're growing so much. So that's me. And when I was talking with Amy, or in our communication together, one of the things that stood out was that difficulty in figuring out the logistics of parents and children's schedules, all of them coming together and different children having different times to do different things. And that enormous challenge of addressing the differentiated needs of each child. And as Amy was saying, even with 2 teacher parents, it was difficult. But, we're both sort of on the same page that we didn't think it was totally awful, this CDL, but, we wonder, despite our abundance of support and resources, how hard it must be for families that don't have all of that. So from this, my question to all 3 of the panelists is, in what ways can we try to make up for some lost ground for students who might not have had extra support during CDL? And I'll ask my question to Amy first, and then we could go to Donna, and then Amy, and then Adam.
How can we make up for lost time, lost ground?
Mm-hmm.
In the classroom, are you thinking academically?
I'm thinking in whatever way. Yeah, I'm thinking mostly academically. How we can make up lost ground for students that might not have had that extra support during CDL. And your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple different schools of thought. One would be to really look at ability grouping and homogeneous grouping when they get back into the building, or not even back in the building. But homogeneous grouping has its pros and cons, but I think that's something to look at. Maybe not for the whole year and maybe not for every subject, but maybe strategically doing that for a certain amount of time might be appropriate to meet the needs of some kids. I think that on the flip side, looking at and acknowledging what these kids have been through, and not just academically speaking, is really important. Just all the different family dynamics that they've experienced, and not necessarily even in a negative way, but just being at home for a year, or being at daycare for a year, or a combination of the two. It's different, whether it's negative, positive, neutral. It's just been really different. And to acknowledge that, kind of that re-entry phase is going to be really challenging for some kids. Some kids will slip right in, but that there's so much more than the academic piece that we need to make up for. The social anxiety that kids may have coming back into school. So I guess, I don't know if I have a one answer to solve the problem, but I think it's definitely a multifaceted piece that we have to look at. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is really a complex issue. Let's go to Donna. What are your thoughts on that, Donna?
Absolutely. I think for me, my perspective is definitely on the community parent side. I don't have a career educational background in education and teaching. And so I think for me as a parent, those are questions that I do have that I think the school district has been doing a really fabulous job from my perspective in communicating with parents. I know there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes, but from a parent's point of view, this past year, I've been so much more engaged in my son's learning and just understanding where the district and the school and his teacher is at. I'm hoping, so I have no answers for you. What I'm hoping is that the communication continues. And so we can, as decisions are made and as strategies are considered and being put into place, us parents, we understand what those might be and why, and how our individual children might be integrating back in. I completely agree with Amy that it's not just the academics. And I think reintegrating into the academic rigor and kind of getting up to the level that they should all be at, I don't think that'll happen without the emotional, mental, physical needs being met. So I, as a parent, think that those probably are the most important needs that I would want the school district to look at. I've been really fortunate to adjust my working schedule and keep my son very on task and very engaged in school, very purposefully. But I know a lot of parents don't have that opportunity. And so for my son's level and education, I think he's probably keeping up fine. I worry more about as he gets back in with the change into hybrid and how different that's going to be, and the change back in hopefully in September and having to be at school at 7:30 in the morning again, more than the actual academics.
Thank you for sharing that. Amy Scholler, you want to pick up on that?
Sure, I mirror a lot of what Donna said. I'm actually not worried about academics at all with my kids. It's fine. It's not optimal, but they're doing okay academically. I'm really worried about the social aspect of going back. I think they're both, after a year of really not seeing anyone except their two best friends and only those people 6 feet away with a mask on outside every once in a while. I think being with groups of strangers is almost going to, I think they're going to have almost a phobic response to that. And they need it. I am dying for them to get back into the classroom, but it's going to be a jolt. And I'm worried about that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Adam, what would you like to add?
Yeah, this is the academic piece is kind of the world I live in, really, with my my job. So I think there's a couple important things to remember. One, everyone's in the same boat. You try and look at past experience that maybe you can learn from, and maybe you have a school that's shut down for a few months because of some disaster. Well, that's an isolated school that you then redirect resources to try and start to close the gap that you've created. This is an entirely different system where everyone is back, right? So the first thing that you already know is, one, you're not going to close that gap right away. This will be a multi-year process academically. For example, let's say you have a third grade student who really didn't finish second grade and has really struggled all of third grade through CDL, and might get a little hybrid at the end of this year, might start in hybrid, might start in full, who knows, next fall. Academically, a good portion of their instruction is probably going to go back to early second grade. And you as a school district are trying to prepare to serve a range of needs right now. One other thing we're looking at is you have to have an assessment system that is excellent, that you understand real deeply. Traditionally, you have those, especially in literacy at K-5. Not often do you have that above fifth grade. You need that now. You need to know what your kids know and can do, because a lot of the problems with CDL, and in particular with the upper grades, is it a I don't know how to do this problem, or I'm not engaged and not willing to do it at the level I might be able to because of the setting we're in. So a lot of districts are going to start with saying, okay, what holes do our kids really have? And you need some high-end assessments and a good plan to figure that out, preschool on up to 12th grade. And then once you have that, teachers are going to need to teach differently. We're used to, the district I work in has a lot of challenges, a lot of students of trauma. And when kids get to us, right, there's this range, and some kids are above grade level and some kids are below, some kids are a ways below. Well, that's going to get amplified by 10 now, because you have students who have just spent an entire year with our situation, 2 teachers at home, hand holding them through their academic world, and they're going to be higher than they would have been if they were in gen ed academically. And then you're going to have the exact opposite. We have kids who we've maybe seen on 1 or 2 Zoom this last 6 months. And so being able to identify and serve the needs of the full spectrum is going to be harder than it's ever been before, because that gap is going to be bigger than it's ever been before. So it's going to take some creativity. It's going to take some really good professional development for educators, because our job is always changing. But now, after living in a CDL world for so long, coming back to teaching in person is not going to be what it was before this pandemic started. And so it's going to be important that we give teachers and our overall systems in the buildings are ready to kind of take on that challenge, because like I said, it's something we haven't seen before on a scale like this.
Thanks, Tana. Thanks, panel. So I think that our next question comes from Stephanie. Stephanie, do you want to introduce yourself real quick and ask a question of our panelists?
Yeah. So I'm Stephanie. I graduated Linfield December of 2006, and then spent 10 years teaching kindergarten for the McMinnville School District. And then I stopped teaching once I had our second kiddo in 2016. So I've been extremely privileged to be able to stay home the last 4 years, going on 5 years. And then I just recently started supervising student teachers with the Linfield Ed department a couple years ago. So that's been a way to kind of keep my foot in the door. And then in terms of when Adam and I were talking about this panel and the topic, we have our son Cohen is a very, we've always used the word passionate for him. That's just him, very passionate, unaware of a personal bubble. Personal touch is his love language, and so he's going to struggle socially going back into the world of in-person anything. So I think if this feeds off of what a lot of our panelists were saying before, is what can we do as parents, and then some of us with our educator hat on, how can we support our kiddos as we transition back so that it's not adding more trauma to them. We know that they're going to be tired, etc. So my question to the panelists, how can we support our kiddos as we move back into the world? And we'll start with Adam and then go to Amy Widmer and then Donna and then Amy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the probably the first question we all have to be asking ourselves. And one thing I think is super important for parents to know, and then also for school staff to really prepare families for, is we're not going back to school as we know it. We've had students in Sheridan, we've had kindergartners, the entire kindergarten class back since October under limited in-person instruction LIPI guidelines. Recently, we've added first and second grade back under a hybrid model. They're a couple of weeks in. And one thing I think it's interesting to see is kindergarten students, they didn't know anything different, right? So this was their normal. And it really, is it tricky? Yes, but it's very doable. 5-year-olds are fine wearing a mask for 2 hours. Especially when it's become their normal, you know. First grade, still pretty okay. They had kindergarten experience in a regular setting, but it was so long ago that they're excited to be back, but it really wasn't all that tricky. Second grade, a little bit trickier, not bad, but still. As we start to come back, the older you get, the probably trickier it will be, especially middle school and high school, because you are not returning to normal school as you know it, right? McMinnville School District did an excellent job of putting some video clips together of what the classrooms would look like and what some of those safety procedures are. But really, we need to make sure that the kids and the families are prepared for their setting, because that's a big change. And then on top of that, I think, as I spoke on earlier, academically, we really have to get some assessing done to know what the kids know. We have to have good plans to address the specific needs for each kid, because each student is going to have their own experience of this last year plus. And then on top of that is knowing that social emotional piece is by far your number one priority. In my opinion, my school district's opinion, pretty much anyone's opinion that I've heard, is as important as academics are right now. The social emotional health of the students, the staff who now have to try and work in this new world. You know, we have teachers that have 30 years of experience and then had to do CDL, and now they're having to switch on a dime to this. The mental health of everyone really needs to be a top priority. I think our superintendent, who's a new superintendent this year, what a great year to start that job. But she's really come to kind of reflect that whatever we plan for is probably not going to be the case in a week. So be ready to do something different at a moment's notice. And that kind of holds true for staff. We've seen it with, I think we're at 13 iterations of guidelines from ODE now. So preparing families and students for that, I think, is what's really going to be important, because the social emotional experience for our kids is going to be like something we've never really seen before.
Thank you. Miss Amy Widmer, as a parent, what do you think we should be working on to help our kiddos?
It took my husband and I about a week to kind of fully decide and fully commit that we would do hybrid, and we felt good about the situation, or about our decision. And so we told our son, and his first question was, well, is it safe? And we said, yeah, he'll be in first grade, or he is in first grade. So we said, yeah, the doctors feel it's safe, the scientists feel it's safe, the virus experts feel it's safe, and so mommy and daddy feel it's safe. And he just said, okay, like I could have really told him anything, and but he trusted us, and so we said we would not send you back. We would not send you back if we didn't feel like it was safe for you. So in that regard, his anxiety really lessened What he's nervous about is just the typical first day of school, because being a first grader, he's only had one first day of school in kindergarten a year and a half ago. So it's just that typical butterflies, but yet it's so much more than just a nervous first day of school with new teacher, new kids. So just kind of realizing that we need to work, even though it'll be, March, and in reality to him, it's really the beginning of the school year. And so we need to recognize that those beginning of the school year feelings are very real and present. As a teacher, I think teachers really need to go in with the knowledge that how the classroom is going to look, like what Adam was saying, that will be very so much more socially and interaction than a lot of kids have. Like what Amy was saying, for her kids, it'll be so much more. For my son, it'll be so much more. But for other kids, their families may have been living a whole nother COVID lifestyle and not really restricting their social gatherings or whatever. And so when those kids come to school, it'll be very restrictive for them to, so you'll have kids kind of in the whole spectrum of what that's going to be like compared to what they're coming from. So if us teachers have been living like a very, safe and socially distanced world the last 12 months, to us, it might seem, oh, look, we get to be with our friends and look how much more open we are. But for a lot of kids, that's not the case. And they're actually getting more confined. So just to be aware of that, to help them through that. And I think, again, the social emotional, I know that McMinnville has adopted a new social emotional curriculum that is supposed to be excellent. My husband, who's a teacher in here at Washer, is really excited about it. And so they're going to implement that quite a bit. So that's really exciting. And then just supporting them with differentiation. And I think that's been a big thing for us this year through CDL is kind of the lack of differentiation. So I think that'll be important to meet kids where they are, whether they are, like what Adam was saying, significantly regressed over this last 12 months, or kids who've really excelled the last 12 months at home. So that differentiation is going to be really important too.
Thanks. That's good points. Donna.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first I have to say, as a parent, hearing these educators speak just makes me feel even that much more secure. And I think I already knew all of you, but it's really cool to hear you speak through your career and your insight. And I have full confidence in Damien's teacher as well. I think for me, so a little context around our situation and my son, and so maybe for some of you it'll resonate, for some it might just be a different point of view to hear. I'm a single mom, he's a single child. I've been taking protected leave off almost half time to be able to manage his school, and then I come into work. And so my son has actually not gotten a hybrid school or academic experience, but every day he has to be somewhere else with other kids. And so he's actually completely adapted to having a mask on when he's either at his childcare center or at a babysitter's or wherever that is. So I think when I think of his transition, he's going to hate it because it is going to be such a different routine. And so one of the first things that comes to my mind is we need to figure out how to ease into a new routine. Right now, pretty much every day is different for us. I mean, Monday is different than Tuesday is different than Wednesday for us. And he doesn't really have to get up until 8 o'clock most days. I'm not sure what his shift for hybrid learning will be. But he he did not want to go back to school for hybrid learning when I told him the good news. And it wasn't because he was afraid of COVID. It's because he wasn't going to get as much home time and kind of downtime as he had never gotten in his life, because I had always worked full time. And so for him this past year, I kind of joke, he's actually been living kind of his best life. Like, he gets to be home. He does pretty well through hybrid or through CDL. He still has to see friends because of my work needs. So I think the first thing for me is really reestablishing that routine, knowing it's not going to be a long-term routine, but it's going to kind of ease us into a new how normal will be. Number two, when I think of that, is I need to be able to model that. And so I think to help him transition back is to model that routine, model, yeah, it is hard, but here's how we get through it. Model the empathy with other kids who might not understand some of the rules, or who might be having a lot of difficulty adjusting to being back with another group of kids. Have empathy for the teachers and the staff who are also trying to navigate this. And so he and I have a pretty good relationship of how he's feeling and why, and how I'm feeling and why. But I think we have to, as parents, we need to be able to model that it is hard and this is how we are getting through it. And I'm not doing great every day either. And then I think a lot that that helps me is just to ask him and to have those conversations. And how are you feeling about this? What are you excited about? Why don't you want to go back to hybrid learning? Because if I hadn't asked, I would have thought that he was scared, but no, it's because he wants to stay home and get some extra tablet time that he's never gotten in his life. So I think those are the three things that come to mind as we transition back for me.
And I don't know who decided to make the first day the day after daylight savings time.
I just figured that out last night too. No. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Lose an hour and then send the littles back.
And that day is always a train wreck. Oh,
We made it a whole year, and that's the one day.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
come in less energized. It's beautiful.
Well, there you go. Good job, Chris. Okay, Amy, I know you have older kiddos, so what are you?
I would say the support for them now is much more onerous than it's going to be during the transition, because every Sunday night is terrible. Every Monday morning is terrible. There's no gas in the tank. No one is remotely interested in going to school remotely. And so just dragging everyone through their days is pretty much what we do. I work part-time. I always have. Our life is really set up to be able to drive kids places and support them. And it's taking every minute of my day after I get home to be like, homework is fun. I'll read in your room while you do homework. And I would say I'm up talking to my high schooler 2 a.m, 3 a.m, multiple times a week, processing feelings about how this is all just awful. So I am really looking forward to not doing that anymore. I think it's going to be well worth getting back into the classroom.
That's hard. Thank you for sharing. Hope is up, I think.
You're muted, friend.
I'm just helping Tonda out. I have 3 sons, and I work at Linfield and at OSU. At Linfield, I work with teacher educators who want to be teachers, and then at OSU, I work with master's students who already have their degree, and then they're coming back to get teacher certification. So I have 20 students who are navigating student teaching while comprehensive distance learning, and many of them are doing it in a different language. So, and various socioeconomic areas. So I see their point of view. I see the point of view as a teacher trying to teach teachers how to teach in CDL. And then I have a middle schooler, I have an elementary school student, and I have a high school student. And I have one who is labeled talented and gifted, and I have one who's on a 504 for anxiety and ADHD, and I have one that is typical. So I kind of have the whole gamut. in my house, I'm lucky enough that I have most of the day I am here so I can navigate Algebra 1 and modern history and advanced math and all sorts of things. So I'm lucky enough that with OSU, I teach online, and my other courses, I'm not too far away. So I get to see that, that aspect of it as well. My question, and some of you have already touched on it a bit, is understanding that most of us in this Zoom right now, we are coming from a community of privilege. We are the people who are able to take off at 4:30 on a Tuesday to talk about this. Understanding that just because we are in that place of privilege doesn't mean that we don't have mental health concerns for our students. And even though we've talked about it a little bit, I'd like to start with Amy Scholler. If you can talk about the topic of mental health as it pertains to your children and your major concerns that you have right now and going forward.
Yeah, I sort of did touch on the right now. I think developmentally, their job right now is to not spend any time with us at all. I mean, technically, I should never see my 15-year-old, right? And he only sees me and my husband. And it's not ideal. I'm not worried going forward. Like no matter what it looks like, it's going to be better than this. And I know that we'll be able to work it out, but the last 4 months have been really, 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 really challenging. And we are privileged, like we have resources available to do that. So I feel really lucky, and I can't even imagine doing this without those resources. I don't even know I don't know what else to say. It's awful. So
Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
Adam, do you think that you could talk about mental health, maybe from both aspects, as a teacher and as a parent? What are your concerns, or maybe even as a teacher who has concerns about your colleagues?
Yeah, it's the topic that there's no real answer to. Unfortunately, I think the resources that in particular public education has was strapped in the first place, but to try and prepare to help students in the type, mental health and social emotional health when it comes to working with kids and trying to help them cope and learn skills that they need. It's not a group project that you do in a class of 30 kids, right? So the first thing that goes to my mind is, how are we going to get the kids in that one-on-one setting or small group setting that we need to be able to start to provide some of the help that they're going to need? Because the resources will not be there unless we magically give billions more dollars to schools. Anyone who spent very much time in public school knows that already. The second end of that, I think, is just what you said. I have colleague friends who they're not coming back. There's a national teacher shortage. Most people know that. This is a Linfield Ed program. When I graduated, there was 90 something people that applied to the position that I applied to out in Sheridan, small district. Pay wasn't great, but there was the last applicant pool we hired from, I think, was 4. That was pre-pandemic. You go to the job fair in Portland to try and recruit student teachers, and you're like a car salesman trying to sell your district just to get people to come talk to you. That was pre-pandemic. I know of at least 6 people leaving the profession, retiring or leaving, friends or colleagues. So, and there's so many things that scare me on that end of things. The problem, I think, is you can't prepare. There's no way to be really ready. All you can start to do is take the first steps. First steps is to be really clear, communicate what the science is around returning to in-person, communicate on what you can do to mitigate risk, get some kids back in a very small amount of time, limited in person, a lot of people were doing. Let them share with their colleagues on how that's going. Hope that everyone stays healthy. Add a little bit more time and a little bit more kids. That's gonna help with staff, with students who, especially, I think the trickier part is, as Amy was talking about, the older kids. Middle school and high school need socialization more than anyone, but that group is also the at most risk at coming back. So the problem, I think, Hope, is there's not a really good answer outside of doing what you can to take small steps, prepare as best you can, be attuned to the needs of your staff, as a district leadership, be really clear on your plan, be concise about what protocols you're going to have in place, and then be excellent at communicating what you're going to do, both to your staff and to your community, and ask for a lot of feedback. The decisions shouldn't be made by 2 or 3 people at a district office level. They should be made by stakeholders that include parents, that include community members, that include teachers, classified staff, and everyone else. And I think if you at least take that route, you're not solving the problem, but you're doing the best that you can given the situation we're in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Amy Widmer, do you have something to add?
Darn it. Yeah, not too much. I mean, I guess basically just, it's definitely been hard and we've had some trying times, but in the end, all in all, we've had a okay, pretty good time, and we've grown as a family, and there's been a lot of positives. And if I was a teacher going back to the classroom, I need to remember that that's not the case for many families. So, to just have the lens of, to not see things through just from what I experienced, and vice versa. If it's been just horrible for somebody and they're going back to the classroom, it hasn't been horrible for everybody. So, I mean, I guess just to be open and listen and, respect everybody's feelings and viewpoints. And I guess what Adam said, explaining the science to students is really important, but also knowing that some parents may be contradicting that. So kids are getting this conflicting messages of, one of my husband's students is not coming back because it is not, according to him, it is not safe with COVID. We should not be coming back. So, there's just a lot of still conflicting messages being, sent to our students, and the younger they are, they can't do their own diligence and figure that out for themselves. And I don't know, just like maybe a logistical thing I was thinking of, I don't know if insurance plans offer counseling or services, but some insurance plans cover smoking, rehab staff or Weight Watchers or whatever, that kind of stuff. And maybe if it doesn't, it could offer X number of sessions for of counseling for educators, or so that's just an idea.
Thank you, Amy. Donna, do you have something to add to our mental health discussion?
Actually, Amy was just talking about insurance and mental health support and counselors. And in terms of the equity piece, one of the things that came to my mind first was, at least those of us who work at Linfield, we do have an employee assistance program. And I think probably a lot of people on this call do as well. And that's not available to everyone. And through those programs, that's where you can, you go through a little paperwork, but you can get free counseling sessions. And sounds weird, I was lucky to have already used it in the past. And so my son was experiencing really high anxiety. I would say starting around April or May of last year, when we were just cut off from the world. And it was distance learning, but it was all asynchronous. And the more cut off we were, the higher it was getting, and it was getting really scary, just kind of the nervous tics that he was having. And so I was lucky that I did already have a relationship with a counselor, and I was able to go through my EAP program to be able to, see her on his behalf. But not everybody has that. Not everybody knows that they have it. And then other people can afford to pay out of pocket and other people can't. And so I think it's one of the biggest pieces that I see in the equity discussion. Interesting for my son is that once summer started and his childcare facility was able to open up in a limited way, and he started going, that anxiety drifted away really quickly. And then it's happened a couple times since then when we've had to quarantine for up to 2 weeks, because I do rely on him going outside of the home, and then inevitably someone in the childcare setting tests positive or it's a suspected case. And so we've had to quarantine a couple times. And during those quarantine periods of 2 weeks, that anxiety and those tics came back. And then as we transitioned back out, they went away. And so I am not a psychologist or a counselor, but I can see how hard it would have been on him had we been completely isolated from everyone. And that makes me really scared for a lot of families that, for medical reasons, for family reasons, whatever, are cut off. So I think those are the two pieces that I see in the mental health arena of equity, and then just what being cut off so much does to my son.
Thank you so much. Keena, I think I'm sending it back to you, right?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks. Yeah, well, my son is, he's going to turn 18 here soon, and he's at Mac High. He's a senior, not his senior year that he thought he was going to have. Probably not the graduation, the prom, the friends going out and getting in trouble. I'm like, go find trouble. He's like, how would I find trouble? I'm going to just sit here and play my video games. So I resonate with what, Amy's saying, is like, they're not supposed to be hanging out with me all the time. We hang out a lot, me and my son. Which is great and not so great at the same time. And so when I met up with Donna, we were discussing just how society and the economy is set up for kids to be in school, right? I mean, that's how we have functioned. And that's why we got into certain professions that we've gotten into. That's just, it's kind of was the expectation up until about a year ago. And since this transition, there hasn't been consistent support for parents while students are at home learning. And so I'm kind of changing our question up a little bit, Donna, based on some other comments that are coming through. But what are the supports and information that parents need in both CDL and as we transition back to hybrid? What are some of the supports that we need access to? What's some of the information that parents need access to in order to make sure that their kiddos are safe in K-12 schools? And so, like, as a parent, what are you expecting from that? What are your needs from school districts, from teachers, from schools? And I'm gonna ask Donna first, and then Amy Scholler, and then Adam, and then Amy Widmer.
Awesome. Okay, so first I get to brag on a Linfield alumna really quick, because Damien's teacher is a Linfield alumna, and actually his student teacher is as well. She's amazing, and she's not just the typical correspondence that goes out, but she keeps in touch with us at such a high level and answers any questions that I have, and especially about this transition into hybrid learning. Specifically for your question, I feel like she might not have the answers, but I know she will find them for us. And so she's been honestly a lifesaver for our situation. I think you kind of talked about our society being set up for, it was kind of a norm for 50 or 70 years that kids were in school, and that allowed our society to grow in a certain way. Going back to my piece of my profession, I look at what that's done to the working world and to working families. I think we've all seen those reports or statistics. I think Over 800 women had left the workforce by September, about 800,000 women, about 200,000 men by September. And we know that there's a lot of factors in that. Lots of industries have been crumbled, people making decisions, but we also know September is when hybrid learning started up again. And I think in January, like over 250 women left the workforce this past month as well. And so that's not only a women or a mother issue, it's a family issue. I think one of the main questions I have for all of these transitions is, I know my son needs to be in hybrid learning as much as he doesn't want to be. How the heck am I going to swing this to be able to keep my job and completely rearrange our schedules again? And I completely understand school district decisions and childcare center decisions to not offer transportation in some cases, to not offer before after school care. For my son, when he goes to hybrid learning, he won't be able to go back to his childcare center for really great reasons to protect everybody. But there's a lot of resources that are gone for those of us who are trying to get our children back into the classroom. And so a lot of that for me hinges on, what do I need to know? I really need to know what that schedule is going to look like. And I really need to know the resources and the community resources that are going to be available, and how and why and how much will they cost, because my job depends on me being able to be here. But my son's well-being depends on him being able to get to school. And so there's a lot going on in my mind now, and trying to figure out how to plan all of this. And I know that the answers will come. I know they can't all come right now. And I also know the school district and his teacher are doing a really good job relaying what they do know. But I think a lot of those answers are logistical ones. What are the next 3 to 4 months going to be looking like, and how do I go to work? And not be transporting them to 3 different places every day, which could be the case. So
yeah, you bring up a lot of good points in terms of just the tough spot that parents are in, and I appreciate you saying that. Amy Scholler, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't have those problems, which I feel very privileged to be able to say. My kids are older. They can bike to and from school if they need to. They can be home by themselves if they need to. They're 13 and 15. My struggle is with the information. I feel like some teachers aren't using Google Classroom. I don't feel like I've heard from principals at all for months and months and months. I feel like the information I'm getting from the school is like, there's a Firehouse Subs night, and here's some homework reminders. And that's the piece I feel like is missing for me, is just kind of contextualizing things. Like, we did finally get a video this week, which as a parent felt like, here are all the reasons we can't do anything, after months of really not saying anything. So it didn't feel super informational to me. So I think I just like a little more kind of shorter, but more frequent, like, we don't know anything, but like, keep on trucking sort of information from the district. And I think that would be helpful. Just kind of the constant reminders that we're still all in this together, even though we don't know anything yet.
Yeah, that video yesterday or the day before did kind of feel a little let down. Yeah, exactly.
All right, okay. Yeah. So anyway, more information is always better.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Amy. Adam, what do you have to contribute to supports and information that parents need?
Yeah, this is really, really, really tricky, especially like hearing Donna talk about her and Damien. It's so like on my end, I'm not the person, but I'm one of many people who has to start to take a look at what we're allowed to do and try and turn that into a reality. But given the circumstances and the parameters that are given to you, there's no way to do anything except for create a system that does to Donna exactly what she just spoke about, given the parameters. I mean, we can't have more than 12 kids in a room given our room size. We can't spread out to more rooms because you don't have staffing. There's no magical pot of money to go hire more staff to then disseminate the groups to smaller size. Most buildings don't have air filtrations that are even remotely close to adequate enough to really filter out air and keep that clean. Insurance companies have come out and said, we're not covering you. If you break this, you don't have liability. So as soon as someone gets sick, so a lot of people are like, yay, governor said we can go back. Well, not if you don't have insurance. Insurance makes the decisions in a lot of cases. So there's all these factors like that. And then you try and, reinvent school every month or two when you get some new rule book. And it's just incredibly, incredibly challenging because you look at it and you have to make decisions upon something bad or something horrible, and there's no right way to do it. So you just try and do the most equitable thing you can. You try and communicate as best you can. I don't work in McMinnville. I work in Sheridan, which is a much smaller community with our own challenges. But one thing I will say about our new superintendent, she is very, very, very vocal about what's in front of us and what she thinks might be coming, what's in actuality. We try to work with families as far as AM to PM cohorts as best you can while still staying equitable, obviously. And just handling the 20 things you're trying to juggle as best you can without dropping too many of them at once. And again, all that being said, it's like that car wreck you kind of see coming, but you can't avoid it because there's no way forward except for right through it. So normally I worry about the middle school and high school. In this case, it's the little guys. How are you going to get to and from school? How are you going to deal with childcare? In our situation, it's, well, I just sent the high schooler to school, but he watches 4 siblings that are in the elementary school and they're not all back at the same dates and times. So, just trying to take in as much of that consideration as you can, knowing that the rules that are in front of you don't allow you to do anything else. There's no after school care. There's no anything that we would normally have. And it's a great reminder of how important a school is to a community, because they're a school, they are your mental health counselors, they're your daycares, they're your world, right? And with all of this coming to stop, we can't go back to being the world right now. And it's just really tough.
All right, and if Amy Widmer will have the last kind of answer to that question, and then Tonda will close us up. If you see my picture go blank, it's because I've got students waiting for me at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to have to skip out. But Tonda will wrap things up and talk about what the upcoming events are. So.
Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add. I think just open communication from the school district to the parents is just so critically important, because when parents don't feel heard, whether the district has control over those things or not, I was reading through a Facebook thread, and it was a very respectful but very frustrated thread from parents, and it was just a really eye-opener of what parents are going through. And these were mostly secondary parents, which, it's definitely not my world. But one person, somebody chimed in and said the district is doing what we can, given the ODE, metrics that we have to work with. And somebody said, well, I don't understand why school districts aren't talking to, asking ODE to give us more lenience or whatever. And whether they are or whether they aren't, it dawned on me that, wow, the transparency is so important. And somebody said, well, as it happens, our district is talking to ODE, and that kind of clarified that. But just the transparency is super important, and just that parents feel that they're being advocated for by teachers and by school districts, even though we know they are. It's important to be, felt and heard. So.
Okay, Keena's gone. I guess I'm taking over then. Thank you so much. I'm noticing the time right now is we're at 5 o'clock, but hearing from all of you and getting your perspectives is super important. I mean, as we work to try to support our own students and as we work to try to support our student teachers as well as, connecting with community and making all of that something that we work on as a community together, because it does take a village for sure. So I'd like to thank our panel members for coming, and I would like to thank everybody for interviewing each other beforehand and getting ready for this. What I'd like to do is to share my screen so that I can show you about our upcoming panels for next month. I think this is supposed to be in a pretty slide, but there you have it. So next month we have a Teaching Today event that is March 16th. It's at the same time on a Tuesday. We're really looking at teaching for equity for students who identify as LGBTQIA+. So that panel will talk more about that and how that plays out in the schools and what the environment and climate and support is. And then in April, we have Teaching for Equity for students who are DACA. So we'll really get into the immigration and DACA issues in that one. And then in May, our Teaching for Equity students who are emergent bilinguals and collaboration in K-12 schools. We'd love to have you all come and talk more about that. If you have more information or other ideas about what we could do as a panel, please feel free to reach out to Mindy or Akina or Grace or me. That would be awesome. Also, I'm going to be here for another 15 minutes or so if people want to hang out and talk to each other and unpack some of this, or just to connect with people that you haven't seen for a while. It would be great to have you. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Take care. So there's some new faces for me. I see some right now. Rose, I don't believe I've met you before.
Actually, my name is Grace. My daughter is Rose, and she always uses this iPad for her school stuff. And I'm not sure if this event is actually for just education major alumni. But I saw the email and I registered because I happen to be having some kind of like epiphany about public school. What I see throughout when my daughter is in CBL is that like the public school is lacking certain kind of accountability in terms of being able to assess our kids, like that like there is no set in stone benchmark that they need to like all the measurement is very subjective instead of objectives, and I think like addressing those can really actually help with the diversity problem that they talk about. I mean, like this is not diversity in terms of like people having a real physical disability or anything like that, but it's like that the skill can be like more like it's not so diverse, like the skill set level. I mean, I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but there is no resources that we can continually access, in terms of like, because there is no written textbook anymore. I don't go to school here, but
Yeah.
it's very surprising that like we don't even have a website, where there's lesson, there is like, yeah, just certain set of knowledge that they need to be
Right.
able to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that raises a good point. It seems like Chris, maybe you could speak to that. Chris, I don't know if you know Chris Starr. He works at the high school with EL students. He's the director of EL at the high school. So maybe Chris, maybe you could say more about that.
It is definitely a question that both parents and teachers have in mind. They're like, how do we assess in this scenario? I have a kindergartner at home, and I know I'm constantly hearing from his teacher, parents, please let your child give their own answers. And it becomes very difficult for us to be able to have an assessment to gauge when we're not sure if it's necessarily that individual providing the feedback. I know at the high school, I get a whole wave of black screens. So from 1 minute to the next, I'm not sure if the student is there or if they're off in the other room playing video games. Whereas for my son's scenario, I'm hearing a lot of the parents are constantly wanting, you can hear the whispers where the parents like, this is how you do this. And so it becomes a question of, yes, absolutely, we need those assessments. I fully agree. Having a standard, but how do you ensure that it's the student that's being assessed? And when there's not that certainty, there's the question then becomes, is this worth the time to create it? Because it does take time, it does a lot of effort, and it is very important. But if it goes for naught, there's not a lot of like, hey, we need to hurry up and do that.
I see. Yes, I went to like, what was that? Like some kind of like meeting to get parents' input to assess